Hello, Rob here. And in this video we're going to be looking at Woman's Hour specifically, and the origins of the Late Night Woman's Hour as a spin-off of Woman's Hour. So, if we look at the syllabus links, it says learners should have an awareness of the historical significance of the programme in terms of its evolution from Woman's Hour and how it's been creating response to industry and audience demands. That's specifically what we're going to be looking at in this video. Remember, BBC is a public service broadcaster. This refers to broadcasting intended for public benefit rather than to serve purely commercial interests. The BBC, which is broadcast in the UK, is funded by a licence fee, does not sell advertising time as the first public service broadcaster in the world. So, the BBC Radio does not carry adverts. It might carry trailers for other BBC products or its own channel's products, but it doesn't advertise any commercial products. The BBC is a state broadcaster. It's not an independent company, so it's not motivated by profit as a commercial broadcaster would be. So it contradicts Karen Seaton's, or challenges Karen Seaton's assertion that media is about profit and power. It does, however, have to justify its licence fee. It's spending money on stuff, it has to say it's using that money wisely. This is usually done using listening or viewing figures to say, well, look how many people listen to it. At the moment, the licence fee is £159 per year, I think. That raises about £3.5 billion approximately per year. Controversially, in 2020, over 75s lost their entitlements to a free licence fee. This was controversial because, of course, the over 75s are retired and therefore may not have much of an income if they're only living on a pension. However, over 75s are the ones who are most likely to watch BBC programmes and listen to BBC radio. So maybe they're the ones who should be paying for it. It's a debate. The licence fee is used to fund the BBC's radio, television and online content, covering all the nations and regions of the UK, but it also covers the BBC World Service, which has an important role in promoting British values abroad and providing reliable, uncensored news to people in the world who don't normally have access to such things. Seriously, listen to the BBC World Service in North Korea can get you executed. Around a quarter of BBC revenues comes from its commercial arm, mind you. It's got a commercial arm called BBC Worldwide Limited. It sells BBC programmes and services internationally. Also distributes the BBC's international 24-hour English language news service, BBC World News, and BBC.com, which is provided by BBC Global News Limited. So, not only does it sell BBC programmes abroad, but it also sells canned rights to BBC programmes. So, for example, Top Gear, for example, has international versions all over the world. The licence fee doesn't go to pay for Top Gear. Top Gear is self-sustaining. But, you know, there's American Top Gear and South Korean Top Gear and Australian Top Gear and Russian Top Gear and German Top Gear. They sell the rights to make international versions of Top Gear, and that brings money into the BBC. So it's not entirely funded by the licence fee. There is a quarter of its money does come from commercial broadcasting, but the key point here is it's abroad, not in the UK. Sometimes if you go want to watch some clip from a BBC programme, for example, online, like on YouTube, for example, you can't watch it in the UK because it's being funded by advertising. Now, the BBC has a motto. It's what's called its public service broadcasting mission. And it's known as the Reithian ideal or the Reithian model. John Reith, later Lord Reith, was the BBC's first Director General going back to 1922, and he introduced many of the concepts that would later define the BBC's public service broadcasting mission. And he says that the mission for the BBC is to inform, educate and entertain, in that order. BBC output should be informative, educational, and should preferably do so in an entertaining manner, but not necessarily. He had a very patrician, patriarchal, almost snobbish attitude to what the BBC should be. He saw it as being the mission to improve its audience, to make us better, to not pander the lowest common denominator. Reith's goal was to broadcast all that's best in every department of human knowledge, endeavour and achievement. The preservation of a high moral tone is obviously of paramount importance, he said. Reith succeeded in building a high wall against an American-style free-for-all, in radio, in which the goal was to attract the largest audience and thereby secure the greatest advertising revenue. American radio he saw as being very low-brow, very trashy, and he wanted to avoid that at all costs. That's where his inform, educate and entertaining mantra came from, So, because the BBC was not motivated by profit, still isn't, it could concentrate on informing and educating rather than just being entertaining. This did mean the BBC was often criticised as being elitist and appealing principally to the middle classes. Its content is traditionally middle brow, at the expense of more populist entertainment for the masses, the lower class audience. They were catered for later on by commercial broadcasting, on television by channels like ITV, or on radio by commercial broadcasting, which did start in 1973 in the UK. ITV started in the 50s, I think. But he thought it was the BBC's role to improve people. It's interesting, like, back when I was a kid, in the 70s and 80s, ITV, for example, was seen as very trashy, very low-brow, very common, very working class. And even though I come from a very working class background, I grew up in a council estate, we weren't allowed to watch ITV because it was considered too common. We had to watch BBC because my parents saw it as being improving and middle brow, just like it says on here. You had ITV families and BBC families, you know what I mean? And BBC families had a kind of snobbish, aspirational view. They kind of looked down on the ITV classes, They were a bit common. There was a very definite sense of snobbishness there. I mean, to be fair, most of the output of ITV is unwatchable trash. To this day, I don't watch ITV. But again, I don't watch BBC either, so go fig. So, middle brow content. What do we mean by this? Low brow, middle brow and high brow. Low brow is low culture. It's trashy. It's popular. It's populist. It appeals to the widest possible audience, the lowest common denominator. Think top 40 pop music. Think soap operas. Think Love Island. Think, anything on ITV or Channel 5, for example. Think Radio 1, BBC 1, BBC 3. In BBC context, they're low brow, right? Middle brow. Middle class stuff. Music, literature, art, films. They're good quality. They're interesting. They can be popular, but they're not as populist as your lowbrow stuff. So BBC's Radio 2, Radio 4, on television BBC 2 are middle brow. Think, kind of like, I'm trying to think of an example. QI is the quintessential middle brow program. It's informative and educational, but it's also entertaining at the same time. Think, your natural history documentaries, the kind of stuff that, David Attenborough narrates. think programs like Newsnight, documentary programs, that kind of stuff essentially. Highbrow, elite, high culture. Think classical music, opera, ballet, Shakespeare and all that kind of stuff, right? That's Radio 3. And BBC 4 on television sort of like is partly highbrow, partly middlebrow. BBC 4 is the kind of place you're going to find foreign language television programming, for example. They will broadcast things like the proms and opera and classical music and stuff like that. So BBC Radio 4 is definitely your middlebrow, middle class, bourgeois, you might say. So, BBC Radio 4 has been going since the 60s, but Woman's Hour predates that. It goes back to the post-war period. Back in those days, you had the Home Service, the Light programme, and the Third programme. The Light programme kind of morphed into Radio 4, I think. Radio 3 was what used to be the Third programme. The Home Service kind of morphed into all of it. If you look at the kind of content that's on it, look. The Home Service had the Harvest Festival, services and country magazine on Sunday. The Adding Machine, Elmer Rice's play on Monday's World Theatre. Presumably something of science fiction there. Hey Ho, with Peter Waring, Kenneth Horne and Chairman Innes on Friday. No clue what that is. Englishman in Denmark, Lawrence Gilman's programme on Channel 5, on Friday, probably a documentary. The Light programme, Marching with the Guards, full band of the Royal Horse Guards, the Blues on Sunday morning, military music. Dick Barton's Special Agent, new daily serial thriller. I don't know about your parents, but your grandparents might very well remember Dick Barton's Special Agent. Later morphed into, I don't know if television, but they definitely had a series of Dick Barton films. The Dick Barton Special Agent theme music is really famous. Kind of a spy program. It was very, very, very popular. Cyril Fletcher in Begging Yours on Monday. Some kind of drama, maybe a sitcom. The Happy Drone. Loveday, Rain Bottom and Enoch on Tuesday. No clue what that is. For the Love of Mike. Michael Howard on Sunday. Could be anything. Third programme, Elizabeth Schumann, Sigeti and Gerald Moore in Monday's Chamber Music Concert. Mendelssohn's Elijah. Centenary performance on Tuesday. The Voyage of Magellan. Dramatic Chronicle, the first voyage around Cape Horn in 1519, Tuesday and Wednesday. The Rape of Lucretia. Third broadcast performance of Britain's opera on Friday. The Damnation of Faust. Sir Thomas Bitchman conducts Berlotz's dramatic legend on Saturday. Did I have to read that? Very, very highbrow there on the third programme, aren't we? But Woman's Hour, the first advert for Woman's Hour from the Radio Times. Monday to Friday at 2 p.m. Woman's Hour. The daily programme of music advice and entertainment for the home. Today, Alan Ivamy introduces Mary Manton on Mother's Midday Meal. Kay Beattie on Putting Your Best Face Forward. Housewife Choice of Gramophone Records. And current serial story, Stanley Wayman's Under the Red Robe. So, Woman's Hour, first broadcast in 1946. And its role was to encourage women to rebuild home life after World War II. First aired on the BBC's Light programme at 2 p.m. and was intended to fit around womanly chores and collecting the children from school. So, if we think primary, secondary, tertiary media. Primary media are media that require your total attention. perfect example of a primary media is a video game. A video game won't play itself. It needs a constant interaction from the player. You have to pay total attention to it. It is a primary media. A book, a novel, for example, is a primary media. It requires complete attention. It's designed to be sat down and read for a long period, many hours in one go perhaps. Going to the cinema is in theory a primary media. You're sat in the dark, you're supposed to have total concentration on the film. Although way too many people nowadays are on their damn phones. Leaving it off. Because there are other things you could be doing in the cinema, but we'll leave that up to you. And secondary media are things that don't require your full attention. You're doing it whilst doing something else. Listening to the radio or music is traditionally a secondary media. This is true here, look. It's intended to fit around womanly chores. Ironing, cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry. These are all things you can do whilst listening to the radio. If I'm cooking or doing the laundry or I'm ironing or whatever, I'm vacuuming, I'll have my headphones on, I'll be listening to podcasts. It's a secondary media, right? You listen to it while you're driving, you're listening to it while you're in work. Tertiary media are things we pay very little attention to, like advertising billboards. This is being broken down, of course, nowadays. Especially in the television industry, we tend to think not of television anymore, but of screens. There is the first, second and third screens, or the primary and secondary screens. Because, let's face it, nowadays, if you're watching television, if you're listening to music or whatever, you're probably going to be playing with your phone or your tablet or your laptop at the same time. You may very well have music on your phone, you're playing with your phone, and still have the TV on mute in the background. Yeah, if you might be playing a video game, but still have music on in the background. Whatever, right? The point is, nowadays, increasingly, the smartphone is the primary media that people are engaging with. And things like television or radio or secondary media or even tertiary media you pay no attention to. A lot of people use television or radio like moving wallpaper. They just can't stand silence. They want some noise in the background, and that's what TV and radio do to fulfill the purpose. Anyway, it's a secondary media. You listen to the radio while you're doing something else. In those days, women were expected to stay home and be homemakers, so they'd listen to Woman's Hour either while they're doing their chores, or they've spent the morning, they've cleaned the house, they've done their shopping, they've taken the kids to school, they've gone out, they've done their shop, they've come home, they've prepared dinner, it's in the oven, it's cooking, ready for when the husband comes home. They've got a bit of time to sit down, have some lunch, have a cup of tea before they go and pick the kids up from school. That's why it's broadcast at 2 p.m. It's the ideal time. They can sit down, have an hour, listen to the radio. The Woman's Hour was commissioned by BBC controller Norman Collins as a diversion for the person he referred to as the poor, wretched housewife. Basically, what does that say about women's lifestyle in the 1940s? He's describing it as wretched. Terrible, miserable, boring. Nonetheless, we've got Olive Shapley here, one of the early presenters of Woman Hour, in 1951, interviewing Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the then American president. So it shows you that it had high standing. Anyway, what does this have in terms of the context historically? During the war, obviously you had conscription. All the men went off to fight. Not all the men, but most of the men of military age went off to fight in the war. There were some men who stayed behind in reserve services, like working down the coal mines or working on the steelworks or the munitions industry or whatever it was they were doing. Younger men and older men were past the age of military service, obviously were staying at home as well. But nonetheless, there were loads of jobs that were now empty and women had to step in and do those jobs. So women were getting a degree of autonomy that they hadn't had in previous years. Obviously, this didn't only happen in World War II. This has happened in World War One as well. But this is the first time this generation of women had jobs, had money in their pockets. They weren't getting married as young because the men were all off fighting. And even if they had got married, there's a good chance they might have been widowed by now. You could be in your 20s and be a widow because your husband had been killed. Nonetheless, you might have got married and not seen your husband for 4 years. Whatever the case was, women were having a degree of autonomy that they were not used to. They had money in their pockets, they weren't relying on men to pay them. But then the men came home from the war, and they needed jobs to go back to. So you needed a situation where women were encouraged to give up that autonomy, to go back to the patriarchal system they had before. Women had to be housewives, they had to be mothers, men had to have jobs to go back to, so women had to leave the workforce and go back to being homemakers primarily. So by 1951, which is 6 years after the end of the war, the number of women working had returned to pre-war levels, so it dropped considerably, and married women were required to leave their jobs. Women were expected to get married, they were expected to be homemakers, they were expected to be mothers, not workers. Men were the ones who worked and brought home the bacon, so to speak. Women were expected to know their place. This, of course, was the birth of second-wave feminism. Of course, what happens when all the men came home? You have a massive baby boom. This is why people who were born in the 40s and 50s are called baby boomers, or boomers for short. People born in the 40s were boomers. They would have been teenagers in the 60s and in the 20s and the 60s. People who were born in the 70s and 80s, like me and your parents, were Generation X. People who were born in the late 80s, early 90s were often referred to as Gen Y. Obviously, people born around the time of the millennial are the millennials, and people of your age are usually referred to as Gen Z. So, after the war, women were returned to the home, they were expected to be married and have children. The question was never if someone would get married and have children, but when they would get married and have children. As more women stayed at home, the role of the housewife was re-established. However, there was a growing discontent with the inequality, unfairness and treatment of these women who had contributed so much during the war. Having the social life that went around working, having the financial independence of work, meant that going to become a housewife who depended on their husband for everything was very boring. So, what kind of things did you have in Woman's Hour that was meant to appeal to these audiences? The original show featured segments like cooking with whale meat. Not battering a whale. That would have been our time. That would be inconceivable nowadays. No one would eat whale meat nowadays. They're a protected species, unless you're Japanese or Norwegian. But yeah, that was the thing. I married a lion tamer. Notice the vicarious pleasure, right? I married a lion tamer, not I am a lion tamer. The husband has the exciting job, and the woman has to live vicariously through her husband. How to hang your husband's suit so it doesn't get wrinkled. Because God forbid a man would have to do that himself. So cooking, a major theme. Most of the country's top chefs at one time or another have been on the show. Still a major theme of Woman's Hour, cooking. The first 45 minutes of the programme consisted of live reports, interviews and debates on subjects like health, education, culture and politics, but all aimed at women's or mothers and filtered through a female matriarchal context. The last 15 minutes was dedicated to Woman's Hour drama, and you would have a serialised feature that changes periodically. So this could be dramatic readings of books, so like an audio book would be today, or it could be full cast dramatisations of, say, a play, or something like that. Now, the programme to this day has been criticised for being patronising, misogynistic, and even back in the 1940s was considered patronising, misogynistic by some audience members. Even Jane Garvey, who was the long-time presenter of Woman's Hour until recently, which she was replaced by Emma Barton, even she criticised the show, saying there was a massively middle-class bent to every programme on Radio 4, and Woman's Hour was included in that. As I said, it's still being broadcast, after over 70 years. The show has 3.7 million listeners per week, with another 1 million people downloading podcasts. It's a lot. It's nearly, 1 in 5 people in the country, practically. The show is still criticised for being patronised, misogynistic. As I said, even Jane Garvey has criticised it. This is Jane Garvey on the left there with, what's her name? I can't remember her name, she was on Sex and the City. Kim Cattrall. I said 2020, in October 2020, Emma Barton became a full-time host of Woman's Hour. Lauren Laverne, as guest, presented it as well. There's Emma Barton presenting Woman's Hour. So, if we look at reception theory in Stuart Hall, the dominant hegemonic position, Woman's Hour was meant to promote the nuclear family, to encourage women to be housewives and mothers. 1940s childcare experts extrapolated that mothers should dedicate themselves to their children or risk the production of a generation of juvenile delinquents. The working mother was therefore an anathema, criminally negligent and selfish. So, is literally promoting a dominant ideology and doing it in a hegemonic manner. It's basically a kind of propaganda to persuade women that they should be housewives and homemakers and mothers and to not go out and work. And it's actually shaming mothers for wanting to go out and work by telling them that you are criminally negligent. It's selfish. If you don't look after your children, they're going to grow up to be juvenile delinquents. Juvenile delinquent means, the modern equivalent would be a hoodie, do you know what I mean? A criminal child. A negotiating position, 40% of the audience today are men. They know it's aimed at women, but they still find it interesting or listen to it. Maybe in order to understand women better, or maybe it's just on in the background while their spouse or partner listens to it. Oppositional reading, again, tokenism, isn't it? The idea that, women get to have a whole hour a day. That everything else is oriented towards men on the channel. Even when it was first broadcast, though, women found it patronising. Bridget Long, in 1946, said, "The programme is much too patronising. What women want is a programme to compensate us for being tied to our domestic chores, to help us keep in touch with the world outside, whether it's books, films, politics, or other countries." Helen Henderson said, "Surely it's not too much to ask that we might have our minds removed from the monotony of housekeeping by a programme which gives us a glimpse of a wider existence." It's pretty sad, isn't it? Let's face it. What does that say about how awful women's lives must have been? How the drudgery of it, the monotony, how boring it must have been. When men get to go out and do the exciting things of the world of work and all the social elements that go with that. So we're talking a very patriarchal, misogynistic world here. Again, we've done the audience for Woman's Hour before, but as we can see, it's 55 plus. It's predominantly, well, 60% female. It's 72% ABC1. I'd argue it's mostly A, because they've got a average monthly disposable income of £1,000 or more, and they tend to be highly educated. I don't imagine most of them are retired, because otherwise why would they be listening to the radio at 2 p.m? Again, left-leaning in their politics, which is something you would think. You'd think they'd be more conservative and old-fashioned, so we say. Now, this is interesting. This is a new demographic profile that the BBC use. Now, I got this from the BBC World Service, and it largely deals with how they see their international audiences, but I guess it applies to the UK as well. So, there are, and there's a link there, you can go and see this, but worldly achievers, the culturally curious, the aspirational providers, connected enthusiasts, active optimists, and comfortable mainstreamers. So, how do we think this is going to relate to Radio 4? Well, worldly achievers. These people are well educated, they're moving up in the world, they're career oriented, they're motivated by a global outlook, they want to be informed, and they care about their reputation. Sounds like a Radio 4 audience to me. The culturally curious, established, thoughtful, and outward looking. They want to know more about the world and see more of it where possible. That definitely sounds like the late night Woman's Hour audience to me. In fact, if we go back here, look, Bridget Long was saying they wanted something to help keep in touch with the world outside, and Helen Henderson said about a wider existence. Well, that sounds culturally curious to me. But there's also the comfortable mainstreamer. They have a reason to feel happy at home within their circle of friends and families. A better life for them is a more comfortable life. We're looking at old, retired people who are mainly listening to Woman's Hour, so maybe some comfortable mainstreamers there too. So, a good one to look at when it comes to you kind of like your demographics that are different to the young and Rubicon demographic and psychographic categories. Right, so there you go, bit of industry context for Late Night Woman's Hour, but more specifically for Woman's Hour. So, if you've got any questions, you know where I am. See you in the next one.